Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, as always, Kevin Mahalik, and this is episode number 200. We made it, the bicentennial episode, the big 200. Thank you to all the listeners out there. This would not be possible without you guys. As I shared, we continue to grow this year. Numbers are up from January. We continue to expand, and that's all because of you guys. You guys continue to share the podcast with your friends like I ask you to do every episode. Text it to one of your buddies saying, hey, baseball's coming back. You're going to want to check out the GSMC Baseball Podcast. It's top notch. It gives you the goods. Check it out. Give it a listen. 5-star rating. Write a review. Do all of the above. But we're very proud here at the GSMC Podcast Network to have reached the 200th episode plateau. So for those of you listening out there, whether it's been 50 episodes, 100 episodes, or if you're one of the lucky ones who has been here from the beginning and listened to all 200 of them, shout out to you. Absolutely. If you are one of those individuals, reach out to me on social media, write a comment wherever you're listening. I want to give you a shout out and show you the love you deserve for being here from the start. But today is Thursday, June 25th, and baseball is officially back. Good news on the 200th episode. I told you guys I was having a feeling those may overlap, and lo and behold, there it is, number 200, and baseball is officially back. But it's not in a way that we wanted it to return. So a brief update since Monday's episode, being recorded Sunday night. There was the latest take it or leave it proposal. The players ultimately voted 35-5 in favor of rejecting this proposal. So a pretty resounding denial of this, which then led to Manfred imposing a 60-game season, and then we were waiting on the players to, okay, we are going to report, which was, known and understood that they were going to show up and ultimately respect and fulfill their March agreement. So this did indeed happen. And then finally, we had an agreement on the health and safety practices in regards to COVID-19 and the coronavirus, because as of time of recording, June 24th, I believe we hit a national high, a new record high for new cases in a day. That's right. As crazy as things were in March and April, well, as a nation, we've now had new cases rise to the point where, we've bested our March and April highs. And honestly, this is due to a lot of the reopening, but the correlation, and maybe more importantly, as I've talked to some individuals in the medical profession, some friends of mine and some colleagues, friends, things along those lines, basically their huge number to look at is hospitalizations and ICUs. As long as hospitals have capacity available in both of those wings of the hospital, things should continue to progress forward and, move as they are. Once those become overrun once again, that's when we get into a possible phase 2 style of quarantine or lockdown, potentially on a state-to-state basis, which really could throw a wrench not only into Major League Baseball's plans, but also basketball, football, the NBA, NHL, all of them are just at the, really the mercy of this virus. So continue to be safe out there. Continue to practice social distancing. Wear a mask if it's being recommended. Here in Pennsylvania, we're wearing masks when we're in any establishment, any business or facility. I know there are mixed messages based on different states out there, but I would just ask, obviously, respect the local establishments and their recommendations to hopefully continue to keep this virus at bay as much as we possibly can while keeping the economy open and allowing people to continue to work and continue to provide for their families. Because if this thing gets out of control once again, obviously baseball and everything I'm about to talk about doesn't really matter because it's going to get shut down once again. But Manfred implements a 60-game season. The players agree. We have baseball. Everybody celebrate. I know from the start I've said July 4th. That was my prediction on my date, and based on health and safety standards, I think that was spot on. I think we could start having baseball, actual games, in about 10 days, considering spring training is ultimately going to start July 1st for these teams. So having baseball on the 4th was doable. I just didn't realize the economic lengths that the owners were going to go to push the season back as much as possible. And just a brief point and wrapping up negotiations, continuing to communicate with players, other sources within the industry, within baseball. I've come to learn, and I think something that's being portrayed wrongly in the media is when the owners say, hey, we're going to have $640,000 worth of losses. And I myself, I think I portrayed this narrative as well, just based on the understanding and everything that's been reported. But as you dive into it, the $640,000 loss, quote unquote, is not a direct loss. Okay. It's essentially a loss on the amount of profit that the owners thought they would receive. The way I was told, very elementary style, is imagine if you were trying to sell a house and it was worth $100,000 and now you're only going to get $70,000 for it. Well, you would be reporting that as a $30,000 loss on this house, not you started with zero and you're ultimately still going to make $70,000 as opposed to $100,000. So my interpretation was every game played, it's going to literally be a negative of $640,000 out of the owner's pockets. And that's not the case. As we've seen with their $1 billion postseason deal, and with no deal being reached between the players and the players are not getting any compensation for the postseason. So that $1 billion is going directly into the owner's pocket. So essentially, using easy math, if they make a standard $1 million per game, well, now they're only going to be making $360,000 per game. They're not going to be losing $600,000 per game, which is what I felt and I thought could be happening. And I was told, no, that's not the case. They're still going to make money. They're just not going to make as much. And they're communicating this as a loss to the media and to the fans. And that's why people are still kind of on their side, because I myself as a business owner going, man, every game you lose $600,000, I wouldn't want to play games. And that's not indeed the case. It's just the fact that they're going to make $300,000 instead of $1 million, and they're calling it a $700,000 loss per game. So just a very interesting tidbit there I wanted to share with all the listeners out there who may be confused on how things are being reported or communicated from the media side based on these negotiations. But diving back in to this 60-game season, some of the rule changes that are coming here for 2020, like I said, 60 games, 40 of them will be inside your division. So NL East, just for reference, Phillies fan, you're going to be playing the Mets, Nationals, Braves, and Marlins. Those 4 teams 10 times each. That will give you 40 games. And then we know it's going to be regional, East, Central, West. You're playing the American League East 20 times. So you have 5 teams in that division. Yankees, Red Sox, Orioles, Rays, and Toronto Blue Jays. You'll be playing those 5 teams 4 times each. It's probably going to be 1 series, I would assume, or 2 at home, 2 away. Obviously, if you're going 50-50 on the home and away split there. So really, it's 40 games in your division and 20 games against the other conferences, same division. So I do like that layout. I like that symmetry of 40 and 20 interleague, as well as just in your division, sprint to the finish for 60 games. I think that's a nice setup there in regards to how the schedule is going to work. Like I talked about, you're going to have games of 2 home and away against the American League, and then 10 games. You're obviously looking at a 3-game set, a 3-game set, and then a 4-4. Or if they're going home and home, 4-4-2. I don't know exactly how you would split up that 4 if you're going to go 5 at home and 5 away for each of these, division rivals in these divisional matchups. But 60 players will be on the spring training roster, and only 30 players will ultimately make the big league roster once the season starts. But another stipulation that's coming along with this roster is it'll start at 30 players, but then after 2 weeks, as pitchers start to ramp up, more specifically starting pitchers, the roster will minimize down to 28 individuals. Then after an additional 2 weeks, now 4 weeks total, because pitchers should be an additional month wrapped up and you should have just 5 starters in your rotation, it'll be down to 26 individuals for the rest of the summer. And we all know about the taxi squads, 20 to 30 guys. That number I don't think has been identified specifically yet. I would assume 30. If you're bringing 60 to spring training and you have 30 to start, that leaves 30 on your taxi roster going back and forth from your AAA facility or a local minor league facility based on injury, availability, everything else moving forward. There will also be a universal designated hitter in 2020. However, not in 2021. That was part of the agreement, or the proposed agreement between the players and the owners, was universal designated hitter for the next 2 years. That is no longer going to be the case. It was only implemented for this summer due to health and safety concerns. They don't want pitchers to be going into the batter's box trying to deal with all of that stuff. They want extra roster guys. They want them focused on pitching for the sprint of 60 games, and we're basically going to get DHs in the National League now, which will benefit quite a few teams in that conference when you break down some of the rosters and some of the position players and really the availability. It's going to be a benefit for sure, and I mean, it's a benefit for the fans. I want to see designated hitters hit. I would much rather watch the likes of Jay Bruce hit for the Phillies than Jake Arrieta for a couple times a game. It also makes life easier on the managers when it comes to manipulating the rosters, as well as late in games. The relievers now need to face 3 opposing batters, so you won't have the righty-righty, lefty-lefty, righty-righty, 3 pitching changes to get 3 outs in 1 inning. That'll be 1 individual that will have to go back and forth, but baseball traditionalists may be a little upset here, but ultimately the designated hitter is in for 2020, but pitchers, as of now, will be back in 2021. So we have not seen the last of pitchers hitting in professional baseball, in Major League Baseball. There was communication around who was the last pitcher to hit in a Phillies uniform. We may never see it again. Well, now we're going to see it again in 2021. But one of the craziest and quirkiest rules that's being implemented for this summer is the extra inning rule. They're basically going to go with the AAU softball start a runner on second base extra inning rule. Nobody out. I don't know if it's going to be the last out or if it should be the last out, and then teams are essentially just going to put a pinch runner out there because, again, expanded rosters. You can now keep a guy on the roster who's extremely fast, knowing that if you do get into extra innings, you're throwing a guy out there on second base. I myself still need to dive into the sabermetrics and statistics about what is more successful, bunting the runner over to third base and then having the next runner or two trying to drive them in, or allowing all 3 hitters to try to get a base hit, knowing that a single will score a speedster there. So you let 3 guys try to get a single, or it's a bunt, sack, fly situation. I'd be very curious about what the success rate would be of both scenarios in the past when people have tried them. Leadoff double, what do they do from there? Ultimately, how successful they can be. But this isn't one I'm as excited about. You guys know, if you listen to the podcast here regularly, I've basically said, hey, let's have a home run derby. Let's play 11 innings, 12 innings. The reason they're putting this rule in is to get rid of the 15, 16-inning games. Well, if you don't want that, just end it after 12, and let's have a home run derby. That would be a heck of a lot more exciting from a fan's perspective. It'd be a heck of a lot better from a highlight reel, Sports Center the next morning, talk at the water cooler. Did you see Harper? He beat Mike Trout in the home run derby in the 12th. Yes, that wouldn't happen. It's East-West. But you guys get it out there. You know what I'm trying to say to you. As opposed to, oh, did you see they put Billy Hamilton on second, bunted him to third, and then a ball in the dirt, scores a run, game over. Like, come on, let's see the derby. let's make it happen, Major League Baseball. If not this summer, let's put that one in moving forward here. But we do have a trade deadline. They're still going to be allowing trades. I find that one interesting. I didn't think trades would be allowed moving into such a quick summer at 60 games, but the deadline is going to be August 31st, essentially the halfway point or a little bit further than the halfway point. Only one trade deadline, obviously, with 60 games. That was a new rule last year with 162, but they're keeping that tradition moving forward. Only one trade deadline of the 31st. That will allow you to get 30 to 40 games in. Ultimately, no, if you're going to make a move, it'd be difficult to give up a lot of prospects for 20 games and not making the playoffs. So I don't anticipate a lot of action during the trade deadline unless somebody really knows somebody's walking in free agency and they're just looking to get a double-A high-value arm for him at the deadline for about 20 games of use. But the last bullet point we'll talk about here in the first segment, we've talked about it in the past, but the playoffs, they will stay at 5 teams in each conference. There will not be expanded postseason due to Manfred implementing the season. That's one of the most frustrating parts of this entire thing as a Phillies fan. Obviously, they were on the playoff bubble with 5 teams, 2 wild cards. If you would have expanded to 8, I would certainly think they'd be very, very heavily in that conversation. And Philadelphia is not alone as a market or a television market that certainly would have benefited from 3 additional playoff teams. So going back to the one-and-done wild card and then the best of 4 postseason, that's the most frustrating thing about this entire thing. I'm cool with the DH, the extra inning gimmick, so be it. It's 2020. But the fact that it's still only 5 teams in the playoffs after 60 games, just frustrating. Super frustrating. But that's a good transition, and we'll stop here for the first segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. When we come back here after a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows, we're going to talk about winners and losers of this whole thing. Winners of 60-game season, who's coming back, losers of this past negotiation and what's going on there. We're going to discuss it all. But I am Kevin Mahalik. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Stick around, everybody. We'll be right back.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, and thanks for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, as always, Kevin Mahalik, and this is episode number 200 of the Baseball Podcast here on Thursday, June 25th. Thanks for listening, everybody out there. Hopefully another work week is going well for you. We're flying on through summertime here. We passed the summer solstice. So our days are getting shorter and shorter by the day here. We've hit the longest day of summer. We're now on the decline, getting shorter and shorter. It's I can't believe that already happened. I feel like April, May just didn't exist. They were a fantasy because we were all at home. We weren't doing much, and it just feels like nothing happened because in my life, nothing did. I know for some of you listening out there, that was nowhere near the case. You've dealt with craziness, whether it's continuing to go to work during everything going on, or you've been affected by this of somebody you know, a loved one, a friend, a family member, whatever it may be. But I myself, I've been relatively, clean of this coronavirus in regards to that my near friend and family circle. So it's just been a blur, and here we are in the middle of June. But if you haven't done so yet, head to social media, check us out, the GSMC Baseball Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, as well as the GSMC Podcast Network. If you're into more than baseball, I know you're digging baseball because you're listening to this podcast, but if you like football, if you like basketball, or if you're into more than sports, whether it's cooking, books, movies, music, news, television, whatever, The podcast network has a show for you guys to check out, and with over 17 million downloads in the month of May, I know you guys are listening to them out there, so we got a lot of quality content coming your way, and we're very thankful you guys continue to listen to everything we're putting out there for you. But here we are in the second segment of the baseball podcast. We're diving into winners and losers. We got winners. We got losers. Chain smokers and boozers. A little Toby Keith for you out there. I can't continue to do more. We may get in trouble there. But the winners of a 60-game season, as well as the past negotiations. Spoiler alert, there are no winners from the past negotiations. The players and the owners, they'll be coming up later when we talk about the losers of the last 60 to 90 days. But the winners, National League teams with extra hitters. We talked about it. The designated hitter is going to be implemented in the National League moving forward. Well, there's a handful of teams in the National League that are going to be much better off by adding the designated hitter. Of course, the average pitcher, I think, hit 181 or something like that. Even if it was above 200, it wasn't much higher than that. So going to the major league average of just under 250, 240 from designated hitters, obviously averaging or adding all of those extra base hits, home runs, doubles, all of the above. But in the National League, I mean, you just look in the NL East, the Braves, they have all those outfielders they can continue to rotate. In New York, Yoenis Cespedes, I don't think he's going to play the outfield for 60 games, but if you can get his bat in the lineup and he can get hot, that could be a huge deal and a huge difference maker for the Mets. For the Phillies, again, you got Jay Bruce right now, not tremendous out there in the outfield, but we saw him get hot last summer and have like 5 or 6 home runs in a matter of 10 games. The Phillies would be all about that again. The Nationals with Howie Kendrick, he's a liability defensively, but we saw in the postseason when he can be used as a DH. In the World Series, he was electric. Then you got the Cubbies, a lot of outfielders, infielders, a lot of bodies. The Reds, multiple outfielders. They can potentially get, more bats in the lineup there. And it keeps going, man. The Cubbies, like I said, you got the Rockies, Diamondbacks, all of them have extra bats that can now be utilized in a rotation around the designated hitter. In Philly, Bryce Harper, Rhys Hoskins, JT Realmuto, and Jay Bruce. I would assume the 4 of them would rotate. Harper and Bruce. Then you got Realmuto, Hoskins at first, Alec Baum. Some prospects could be utilized in the designated hitter role. So NL teams, definitely winners here. Another winner of all this are deep teams and teams with high-level minor league systems. The first one that comes to mind, the Tampa Bay Rays. Somebody who, over the course of 162 games going up against the New York Yankees, the Red Sox, all of those squads in the AL East, could potentially get beaten up, but with a sprint of 60 games, with how deep their team is, how they continue to roll at you with 3, 4, 5 quality starters, I think in sprint formation, they could be one of the teams ultimately to be reckoned with and could really possibly win the entire thing. I really like the makeup of their team. A lot of people in Tampa Bay are extremely confident. That clubhouse is extremely confident in what they have down there. They know every year they continue to be overlooked by the team spending a ton of money. The Astros, the Yankees, the likes of those two have met in the ALCS. Well, Tampa's sitting there going, hey, we like where we're at. We like what we're going to see. I like the Oakland A's as well. A deep organization, high-level minor league team, Moneyball, sabermetrics. If we get injuries or coronavirus outbreaks in particular parts of countries or clubhouses, somebody with a deep minor league team is going to be much better off, because I think, honestly, Major League Baseball is going to be next man up if we have COVID or if we have coronavirus outbreaks in the locker room. I haven't read the specifics yet around what the deal is. If there is an outbreak, what the move is, shut it down, just suspend that person. But if they ship out 10 guys and bring up 10 guys from the minor league, obviously people with deep minor league programs are going to be much better served here this summer. Teams on the playoff bubble are also winners. With 60 games, it's much more of a sprint. We said last year the Nationals, after 60 games, were 28-32 and would have missed the postseason. Ultimately got hot, went on a run, made the playoffs. The Oakland A's, who I just talked positively about, but they tend to start out slow every year, turn things on around the All-Star break, continue that into a second half push. Well, they're not going to have that amount of games to make up space, so they're going to have to come out hot. The Philadelphia Phillies, again, 60 games with the likes of Wheeler, Nola at the top of the rotation. Then you get Spencer Howard, who is a top prospect who would have been absolutely on an innings limit and we wouldn't have seen probably until the month of July. Well, if you're getting 60 games and 12, 10 starts, whatever it may be, 5, 6 innings a start, 60, 75 innings, that's right where they want them. So now you got that horse from the get-go. So if you have some starting pitching and you're on the bubble and you get hot for a month or two, it's certainly fascinating because baseball is really the only sport where poor teams and teams that are rebuilding or may not be competing can get hot for 50 games. You can get hot for a month and a half and go 30-15 over the course of 45 games, even if you're the Orioles or even if you're the Phillies. I looked at some of the Phillies splits. I know I talk about the Phils a lot, but again, forgive me, that's the hometown squad. But in 2018, 60-game windows, right? That's 180 games, so there is some overlap, but just follow me here ever so briefly. First 60 games, 32-28, would have been right on the playoff bubble. I think missed it by a game. Ultimately, in the middle, they were like 22-38. They were absolutely horrible. Would have been the last team in the league. And then the last 60, I think they were 34-26. So yeah, it was one summer. You got a playoff bubble team, a playoff team, and then the worst team in Major League Baseball, all in the same clubhouse, all with the same roster over the course of 162. So to sit here and think, yes, this is ultimately how this team is going to perform, or this is what is going to happen, it's just crazy because the variance is going to be so outstanding that it's just not going to happen. So playoff bubble teams, you get hot, you write a starting pitcher who finds it clicks for 5 straight starts, he goes 4-1 over the course of a month, and boom, you're halfway home and you got yourself a chance. Other winners include fans of the game in general, just fans of baseball, because we're going to have baseball. Yes, if you dive in, the diehard fan may not be as excited, is probably still upset about everything that has taken place over the past month to 2 months here, but your casual fan is saying, oh, baseball's back. I don't really care about the agreement, whether there's baseball in the future. I just want to watch sports because I'm a sports guy and I want them back as soon as possible. Well, baseball's thrown their ring in the hat. And even when it comes to spring training, there will be no games, quote unquote, in spring training. It will be all inter-squad action, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get some cameras or some footage of some inter-squad games. If it's between July 1st and July 24th, and local Comcast Sportsnet wants to put on the Phils facing off against each other, I'll watch that. I'll watch that over another rerun or another Netflix show or something like that. So it'll be curious to see if people or local television networks put on some spring training inter-squad games potentially to try to make some revenue with local marketing. I think it would be a good idea. They put on the spring training games during normal times in February at 1 o'clock. Well, put it on at 1 o'clock now. There's nothing else on. I can tell you that much. You're not competing with other sports programs at that time. You won't be upsetting taking the time slot of whatever is running currently at 1 o'clock. So I say go ahead and do it. And then the last winner I had specifically was a team, and that was the Houston Astros, because with no fans in the stands, they don't have to get worn out everywhere they go this summer. Every stadium they were going to go to, all the fans were going to be all over them. There probably were going to be signs everywhere, people probably banging trash cans, sneaking in small baseball bats, banging them on the seats or something like that. I'm sure the people working the audio at the stadiums would be playing different types of music and referencing everything that had happened. So the Astros certainly find themselves a winner, not having to go in hostile environments over and over again here in 2020. But some of the losers of everything that's going on is rookies or younger players who are looking to ramp up their Major League Baseball career. Because with a season of only 60 games, every game matters exponentially. So for teams that are basically like, yeah, maybe we'll give this rookie some time. Can he play? Let's try to find out. Well, if they're still really trying to compete for the playoffs and trying to win the World Series this summer, that rookie's not going to get a lot of time. Because if you give a kid 2 weeks to try to figure it out, that's going to be 13 games potentially out of 60. You're looking at almost 25% of the season. Are you going to give somebody 25% if you're not sure what return on investment you're going to get performance-wise based waste out of that individual, I don't think those teams are going to be as, positive or as willing to allow guys, younger guys, to try to find themselves and prove that they belong. They probably get a shot, but it may be 1 week instead of 2, just because as games start slipping away early, you find yourself at 3-7 through 10 games. You're going, man, we got to turn around this quick because we don't have the marathon that we typically do. So we got to move on from this rookie, maybe sign this old vet, get in here, have him hit 240 because the kid's only hitting 180 and we don't have time for him to get out of this mini slump here. Another loser of this is top-tier aces. And I say this kind of as a fan of the game, but I touched on it as being a good thing for kids who are on innings limits. Well, for your Garrett Coles, Aaron Nolas, Max Scherzers, Jacob deGroms, Clayton Kershaws, you're only going to see him 10, 13 times this year. Normally you see those guys run out there 30 to 35 times, get a ton of starts, but only 10, 15 times. And that sucks because I love Aaron Nola Day. I wake up every fifth day normally during the summer going, oh, what day is it? Oh, it's Aaron Nola Day. I can't wait to watch him pitch, watch him work. The Phil's got a great chance to win tonight. It's going to be a quick ball game because he works fast. And for that feeling to only happen about 10 to 12 times is certainly going to be a little bit of a letdown. I mean, it should have happened 10 to 12 times already this summer here. So, just a bit frustrating. But fans of career records or milestones are also big losers this summer. The likes of Albert Pujols coming to the end of his career. He's creeping up on RBI, home run, at-bats, all different types of records, or moving up in the career record book from 4th to 3rd, 3rd to 2nd, things along those lines. Everything is going to be slashed there. Obviously playing 60 games instead of 160. Maybe he hits, 10, 15 home runs instead of 25 or 30. And ultimately, you're going to look back at the end of his career going, yeah, but he got shortchanged about 100 games. He'd probably have another 20 dingers and be ahead of these 2 to 3 more guys. And that sucks for those guys for sure. Even the likes of a Mike Trout, who's continuing to try to push his legacy long term, you're going to look back and see 30 homers, 40, 40, 30, 30, 15, and go, what? Oh, that's right. That was the season. They only played 60 games. But owners and players, they are obviously both losers during this entire thing. They couldn't come to an agreement. They were negatively in the press for the past month to 2 months about how millionaires and billionaires are bickering while people are out here filing for unemployment and losing their jobs. So yes, we're getting baseball, but ultimately they still come off as losers in this entire ordeal. And lastly, one team that I have is the LA Dodgers, just based on the fact that Mookie Betts could potentially only play 60 games for the LA Dodgers in an LA uniform. Yes, 60 is more than 0, which very much was a realistic possibility even as little as a week ago, but it's still not 162, and giving up a ransom that they did to acquire Mookie Betts, anything short of a World Series trophy would be a letdown. And for him to only get 60 games, if they don't make a run or start out slow or whatever it is, as a Dodgers fan, that would just be frustrating, especially if he walks here coming up in about 6 to 8 months, or maybe sooner. I don't even know how long the season or when the next free agency period opens. Where are we? June? But, oh man, that'll wrap it up here for the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I appreciate each and every one of you guys listening out there. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. We're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows, but when we come back in segments 3 and 4, I'm going to give you guys an update on my power rankings. I know we may have done this in the past, but hey, it's been a minute, so we're going to jump in again. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back, everybody, to the third segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, and this is episode number 200 of the Baseball Podcast. It is Thursday, June 25th. And I appreciate everybody listening once again today. But we've had a great episode so far. In the first segment, we talked about what we're going to get here. Baseball is back 2020, MLB, 60 games, designated hitter, no expanded playoffs, all of the above. We dove into all of that stuff. And then in the second segment, we talked to you guys about winners and losers of the past 30 to 60 days, as well as heading into this summer and the return of baseball. But what I wanted to do here for segments 3 and 4, I know months ago, at this point, probably 2 months ago, we ran through a preview of each division. We dove into each team just a little bit, talked about what to expect potentially moving forward. Well, this was back at the time where I thought we were looking at July 4th. I thought we were looking at 80 to 100 games, potentially even more if we're playing double headers. People were talking about 120 games. Well, now that it's 60 games, I wanted to revisit power rankings, run through all 30 teams, kind of where we're sitting here a week from spring training, where I think ultimately all of these teams are going to, fill in line. And as I was writing them down, I was filling them out 1 through 30, and we're going to go from 30 down to number 1 here. That way we're going to make you stick around till the end of the episode to see ultimately who is number 1. But as I was writing names down and teams down, I realized that there's almost 3 different tiers to put teams into. And even within those tiers, there's kind of tier A and tier B. But in tier number 3, the worst of the worst, going 3 to 2 to 1, I think tier 3, you can kind of put all of these teams into the same category. And that category is the category of non-competitive, rebuilding, and developing for the future. Obviously, you guys know the likes of all of these teams. We just saw a bunch of them pick high in the Major League Baseball draft. The first 5 teams were certainly among the first couple of picks. But number 30, the Baltimore Orioles, they continue to just not have a competitive baseball team. That's going to happen again this summer down there in Camden Yards. Shout out to all my Orioles friends down there. I always have a good time hanging out in Baltimore, going to a game at Camden, having some fun at Pickles afterwards by the stadium. But I just think it's going to be another summer where ultimately it's going to be about a week to 2 weeks before you find yourselves talking about 2021 and how you guys are going to improve. But the Detroit Tigers I have on this list as well. Obviously, they have some pieces there. They just had the number 1 overall pick, Spencer Torkelson. He won't be up this early, but he is a fixture of the future for them, they hope, taking over for Miguel Cabrera. They traded some of their assets last summer. They still have Boyd in the rotation. I would peg him as somebody who could potentially be moved at the August 31st trade deadline this summer. Detroit will be way out of it by that point. He still has a year of team control. What are they going to give up for him just for 20 games? And as a starting pitcher, that's what, 4 starts, 5 starts if you're pushing him very quickly. So you're not going to get much return. So maybe Detroit hangs on to him, tries to make a run again in 2021 and get more value out of more games for a starting pitcher. But rounding out this bottom 5, the Miami Marlins. Everybody knows in Miami, they're shipping everybody out of town. Derek Jeter out there. They're rebuilding. They're potentially the only ones happy about not playing a ton of games because they may actually be losing money. I talked earlier about how it's just not gaining as much money as what they're calling losses. Well, Miami may actually be losing money. The last 2 squads I have here are the Kansas City Royals and the Pittsburgh Pirates. Just being in the state of Pennsylvania, knowing some Pirates fans, knowing a lot of people from Western Pennsylvania. I've had people in my family go to the University of Pittsburgh, and this is not a new phenomenon to have the Pirates rebuilding, to have the Pirates not spend any money, to have them trade away anybody who's any good, to continue to just have prospect after prospect. We saw it with Garrett Cole. He was drafted number 1 overall. They clearly got that pick right. They shipped him out of town to Houston. They then traded for Chris Archer, but now they're looking to turn around and flip him for more assets moving forward. They traded McCutchen a number of years ago out to San Francisco. He loved Pittsburgh. He was the heart and soul of that team. One of his kids is named Steele, after the city of Pittsburgh. So just fascinating to see Pittsburgh continue to just stay near the bottom. And then the Royals, who had that run, almost a decade ago now, it feels like yesterday, but they've come all the way back down to the bottom and are continuing to rebuild. That's for sure. So this next tier of 5 teams I have slightly better than those 5, but certainly nowhere near playoff contention when it comes to 2020 and this season. They should take a step forward or two in their development. They are looking towards the future, but again, not playoff worthy when it comes to conversation. I have the Seattle Mariners at number 25. I don't think the Mariners stand much of a chance this summer. I think they're continuing to get young, look towards the future. They may let a couple of kids up and get a shot here after a handful of games when they start to fade. Then we have the San Francisco Giants. They recently hired Gabe Kapler from the Philadelphia Phillies, who he's honestly perfect for what they're looking to do. And Gabe Kapler is probably not as bad as a manager as people think he is. And honestly, I can't speak for people outside of Philadelphia, because here in Philly, we hated the guy, and he never stood a chance from the beginning, especially from game 1 when he took Aaron Nola out after like 80-some pitches in 5 innings because the computers told him to go to this matchup instead of Nola. And we learned real quick that, we don't want a guy doing this based on computers here. We want a guy based on his gut like Charlie Manuel. But out in San Francisco, being a little more open to analytics and the future of that side of baseball, as well as where the team stands in their development, with Kapler's background in player development and continuing to grow individuals, I think it aligns for them to continue to develop. I do think Kapler's in one of these catch-22s where I think he's starting to get this mold of, hey, let's bring him in for rebuilding teams. He'll get them on the right track. But then ultimately, when we have to get over that hump and take that final leap, we're going to move on from Kapler and bring in somebody like Joe Girardi or, Dusty Baker, whoever it is. But until Kapler actually wins, I think it's going to be tough for him to get that gig of the team that's, hey, they're ready, all the talent's there, they just need a manager. I don't see Gabe Kapler as being the face of that movement just yet. But number 23, I have the Colorado Rockies. They really have Nolan Arenado, Charlie Blackmon, and nobody else, Trevor Story. You could sprinkle in there, but Arenado, after signing that huge deal, they told him they were going to try to compete year in and year out, and he is obviously not very pleased. He has been very vocal and being upset with the direction of the organization since he signed that deal. They shipped off a lot of people out of town. They are now rebuilding, and Arenado really doesn't want to be a part of it, and I don't blame him. Best third baseman in baseball, Gold Glove, top hitter, huge contract. I would want to get out of there as well and get onto a team that's trying to compete as soon as possible. We have the Texas Rangers coming in at number 22. Texas just, they're just kind of there, honestly. Like Joey Gallo, he can hit it a mile, but he also strikes out a ton. He's really the only huge name they have that jumps out at you, from a national non-baseball diehard perspective. They got some pitching that can keep them around. Lance Lynn had a strong year for them last year. I don't know if he'll continue that into this year. He really went above and beyond his past in Minnesota and the likes of other squads that he was on like that. So we'll see if he continue to make moves going forward. And then number 21, I have the Toronto Blue Jays. I have them just outside of tier number 2. I have them just a year or two away from really surprising some people, obviously with the kids. Guerrero Jr., Bichette, all of those guys, Biggio, they're going to be fun to watch, but I don't think they have the pitching to ultimately be able to compete in the AL East with the likes of the Yankees and the Rays, and then the Red Sox still having some solid arms, some solid players. I think it puts them at fourth place in that division and really not that close to a playoff opportunity. But those are the Tier 3 teams, those 10 or so. Then we get into Tier 2. I broke those down into Tier 2A and Tier 2B. Starting with Tier 2B, these are numbers 20 through 16. I have these teams that could potentially make a run to the postseason, could really surprise some people, especially with only a 60-game sprint coming up. But they're really going to need some breaks. They're really going to need some individuals to develop. They're going to need some kids to get locked in, potentially some injuries on some teams elsewhere, a virus or two spread. But if they do make the playoffs, you could say, wow, they were ahead of pace and ahead of development, but I do see the talent coming to the forefront here. And starting off with number 20 is the San Diego Padres. Once again, the pitching staff, I have them as really the only liability there, and that staff is loaded with young talent and loaded with young kids who would potentially have been on innings limits or are trying to make their way, and that's where I get to the point of they have high talent, high ceilings. If they reach their potential, all four of them, Paddock among the top of those, they could steal some games. Then you got Tatis Jr., Machado, Hosmer on the offensive side. They get hot, they go on a run. They could be one of those teams that goes 25-10 over the course of 35 games, plays 500 ball the rest of the way, and boom, there you are. You're in. So next up, I got the Boston Red Sox. We touched on it. The AL East is going to be extremely tough. They traded Mookie Betts this offseason. They traded David Price this offseason. They've made a ton of moves. Chris Sale had surgery. He's going to be out for the year, so two arms in the rotation are going to be replaced. A center fielder needs to be replaced, but you still have J.D. Martinez. You still have Nathan Eovaldi. You still have names up there in Boston like you always do, and you still have a solid ball club to where if things happen in New York or if Boston gets hot, the team gets behind them, it's going to be one of those things where they can make a run. And if you say, oh, the Red Sox are fighting for the playoffs, yes, they're the Red Sox. Of course they are. That's what they do. Next up, at number 18, I have the Chicago Cubs. Again, some people are higher on the Cubbies than others. I personally have them right in this tier, in Tier 2B. On the outside looking in when it comes to the postseason, people are saying Theo Epstein out in Chicago, it could be time for a rebuild. They could be looking to move on from quite a few of these individuals because they can't pay all of them. Coming up, we've heard Chris Bryant's name be on the rumor mill time and time again, and if the Cubbies don't come out hot and they're sitting around 500, flirting with a rebuild, they could potentially move on from some guys. They could trade some individuals. You got Schwarber, you got Rizzo, you got a lot of people who are going to have to be paid over the next couple of years, and they're going to have to pick and choose ultimately who they think is part of that core and their core moving forward. And those other guys who are not on that list are going to be available, and that's where I think they hang around, but ultimately they don't make a move to try to get over the top. And this offseason is where Chicago starts to begin looking very, very differently as a team moving forward. Number 17 and number 16, these are my two squads. I don't know with a 60-game sprint if the same outcome would happen as opposed to 162. But number 17, I have the Cincinnati Reds. I think the Reds are that team with young talent really coming together. Last summer, I thought a couple of their guys really saw the light and things started to kind of click for them, whether it was confidence internally or just seeing success on the field. I think a lot of things happened for them to click. I think they're very confident in where they're at. They like the attitude of Amir Garrett rubbing off on that team. Joey Votto continues to be a stalwart in the middle of the lineup, and I think moves could be made in Cincinnati, but this is where I think ultimately they're probably a year or two away, which is why they're on the outside looking in. And then number 16, the Chicago White Sox, Southside Chicago. Chicago comes in at 18 and 16, but the team on the south side, man, they are young, they're talented, they're exciting. They finally spent some money this offseason in signing Dallas Keuchel adding to the rotation. They got Giolito in the rotation, who's an up-and-coming stud. You got the likes of those two at the top end, a bunch of young kids offensively who really don't know any better than to go out there and just ball out, whether it's 60 games or 162. They're going to be fresh. They're playing with attitude. They're playing with swagger. And if they get hot early, if they come out of the gates 10-5, they win some games early, this could be one of those teams where the snowball starts to turn into an avalanche as things start to get rocking and rolling. Or they come out slow and they tend to fold and they go, okay, it is a rebuild. So I think for both the Reds and the White Sox, the start of the season is very, very important to ultimately how things are going to play out, because I don't know if the mental toughness will be there with a young and up-and-coming team trying to find themselves. But we'll pause there now that we're halfway through our power rankings, number 30 through number 16. Tiers 3 and 2B, really on the outside looking in. But when we come back here in this fourth segment discussing 1 through 15, I think each one of these teams has a shot to make the playoffs. Now, not all of them are championship contenders, but I do think each one has a shot at the postseason. So we're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. But when we come back for our fourth and final segment, we're wrapping up our power rankings. I am Kevin Mahalik. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back, everybody, to the fourth and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. This is episode number 200 of the Baseball Podcast here on Thursday, June 25th. I appreciate everybody listening out there. If you haven't done so yet, leave us a 5-star rating. Go ahead, swipe up if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. That's all you got to do. It'll take you down to the part of the screen where you can leave a review. Click the star all the way on the right to give us 5 stars. We're up to 18 ratings now on iTunes. I appreciate everybody going there and leaving a rating. We haven't had a review in about a week or so now, so that's what I'll task you guys with heading into this weekend by Monday. If we could get 1 or 2 more reviews written on there, I'd very much appreciate it. Let me know where you guys are listening from, who your favorite squad is, what the deal is, what you appreciate, what you like, what you don't like. We'll read it here on the show, and we'll talk about it, as this is certainly a community out there. I want this to be much more of an interacting podcast here as opposed to me just yelling at you guys my thoughts all the time. Let me know. Head to social media. Head to Facebook. You can write on our Facebook page, ask us a question, give us a comment, let us know your thoughts, as well as Instagram, Twitter, all of the above. GSMC Podcast, as well as the Baseball Podcast, is on there. But the fourth and final segment coming up, we're continuing to run through our power rankings here. Nothing out of the ordinary thus far through the first half. We're coming down the stretch at number 15 through number 1. And number 15 through number 11, these next 5 I have as Tier 2, but Tier 2A, meaning I think these teams are still long shots, but there's much more of a possibility for them to make the postseason than any team we've discussed here in the last segment, because, you know, things won't have to entirely go their way. Maybe they get hot for a little bit. They're a little bit deeper roster-wise. But starting out number 15, the Milwaukee Brewers. They've been a postseason stalwart the past couple of years, very consistently at the top of the NL Central. Christian Yelich continues to be one of the top players in all of baseball. He continues to rake since his time at Milwaukee. But they did lose a lot of pieces this past offseason. I talked about that when we previewed them more specifically individually. But with everything they've lost, with the amount of pitching that has moved on. I just think the Brewers are now potentially behind a couple of teams in the NL Central, and looking up at a few teams we'll mention here moving forward. But Christian Yelich gets hot. He hits 400. He carries the squad for 60 games. They could win that division. They really could. I don't think the odds are that high, but I certainly don't think as much as a lot of the other experts out there as they'll be okay. But I don't have them as being as good as they've been in the past. At number 14, I have the LA Angels. I'm a little bit higher on the Los Angeles Angels than some out there. I just think offensively, this may be the summer where everything comes together for them. Adding Anthony Rendon to the likes of Mike Trout, Albert Pujols, Justin Upton, Shohei Ohtani. In the rotation, you get Ohtani back. That's really that's their weak point, and it has been for years, is that starting rotation. And if they can hang with the teams in the AL West, because you got two teams ahead of them here in the power rankings, and they're at number 14. So 3 teams in the top half of the entire league coming out of the AL West. The Anaheim Angels, there you go, I said it. I knew I would. Put $1 in the jar here on the table here, just like the San Diego Chargers. Every time you say that, you got to put $1 in the jar. But the LA Angels, I'm a fan of Mike Trout, Ohtani. I think they put it together. I think they're a lot closer to postseason action this summer than people think. And I'm really pulling for Trout to get back into the playoffs. And that was going to be one of the things about the expanded postseason, was you were going to get the likes of Mike Trout back in the playoffs. You were going to get Bryce Harper in the playoffs. You were going to get Francisco Lindor in the playoffs, and he may not make it now. So just frustrating that they didn't expand those to get more of the big name individual talents into the postseason. Number 13, I have the Arizona Diamondbacks. I wanted to put them much lower. I'm not very high on this squad when it comes to actually making a run or being a legitimate threat to the postseason or to a championship. But as you continue to go, they're just a solid ball club who comes at you 1 through 9 in the rotation. Robbie Ray, he continues to be filthy from the left side and potentially be a trade chip, but not so much. And then, they signed Madison Bumgarner, who I think he's potentially running out of bullets and maybe over the hill, but he's only 29 or 30 years old. He's just been around for 10 to 12 years already. He's been throwing since he was 19. So is it still too young to run out of bullets? Probably, but just my gut's telling me don't trust it. But you got Ray, you got Bumgarner, you got offensive talent out in the desert, and Arizona's going to be there coming down the stretch. I don't see them as a threat, but I also don't see them fading or going anywhere early on. Number 12, I got the Philadelphia Phillies, and I wanted to put them 11, but I said, you know what? I can't do it. I can't be biased, because at 11, I got the New York Mets. I got the NL East coming in at 12 and 11, and if you want to flip them, so be it. But the Fightin' Phils at 12, we touched on it. They got Nola at the top of the rotation. They got Arrieta. They got Wheeler. They got Howard potentially coming in there. You got, obviously, Bryce Harper, who gets off to a hot start. He's historically one of the hottest starters in all of Major League Baseball. Started hot last year for the Phils. He starts hot for Washington. Will he start hot now that it's going to be the month of July? Or is that just because it was April and he actually struggles in the month of July? There's a lot of conversation there around the Phils. But if Wheeler and Nola become a 1-2 and both of them in their 10 to 15 starts go 8-4, you're looking at 16-8, and then you just got to go 500 in all your other starts. And very similar conversation with the Mets. They got Pete Alonso at first base coming off a Rookie of the Year. He should improve. You got Jacob deGrom, multiple Cy Young winner, probably should win it every year, even if he doesn't, type of thing at the top of that rotation. Yoenis Cespedes possibly now in the designated hitter role. So the Mets, they certainly think they could make a move. Obviously losing Thor to Tommy John surgery hurts, and that's probably why I should flip them with the Phillies. But both of these teams, again, I don't think are championship contenders. But also, if you look down the stretch and you go, hey, the Phillies are the second wild card, you could see that with the addition of Joe Girardi, Didi Gregorius, all of these individuals. I think they're right on the cusp of potentially making the postseason. And these top 10 teams I have in Tier 1. teams 10 through 6, I have obviously playoff expectations, championship aspirations, and then the top 5 I really have as my championship contenders, and I really do think one of the World Series winners is going to come from these top 5. But at number 10, I have the Cleveland Indians. Just their rotation, Bauer, Clevinger, Bieber, Terry Francona's there on the offensive side, Santana, Lindor, Ramirez, just still a very, very solid, top quality baseball team. Not as good as they were in 2016-17 when they made it to the World Series and they were making a run, but certainly not a team that has completely fallen off. Terry Francona, one of the best managers in the business. Lindor, one of the best personalities in baseball. Clevinger continues to be just a goofball who shoves on the mound. He's got Sunshine hair from Remember the Titans. I couldn't remember the name Sunshine there for a sec, but he's got that hair with the Titans, and he just throws frisbees up there. So they could win the AL Central. They could make a run to the postseason, potentially be a wild card. I think they have playoff expectations. Number 9, I have the St. Louis Cardinals. I just think the Cardinals are as steady as she goes. Again, they don't have any huge names jumping off the page. Obviously, they got Flaherty in the rotation throwing 100. You got Hicks coming out of the bullpen, Molina behind the dish still, but that squad, just a very, very good team, very good organization, top to bottom, minor leagues, major leagues, all of the above. I think through adversity, through a sprint, through chaos, that we're just going to see old steady St. Louis coming on down the pike here. But number 8, I have the Oakland Athletics. I like Oakland as a squad every year, just bombing baseballs out west. Davis out there crushing balls. They always sneak up on people out west. Like I touched on it though, historically slow starters that tend to turn things on by the All-Star break and by the second half really push it into gear and get where they need to be. Well, they're not going to have that amount of time this year. They're not going to be able to start slow, kick it off, kick it into gear with the sprint of 60 games. So that's why I have them there at number 8. But I know division aspirations out in Oakland is what they're looking for. And if they don't win the AL West, they're certainly going to be disappointed. Number 7, the reigning World Series champs, Washington Nationals. The short season, I think, helps them. Obviously, the workloads of Max Scherzer. He was scratched from his start in Game 5 of the World Series due to some issues. Steven Strasburg, World Series MVP, throwing a ton of innings. Well, now you get a shorter season. Again, 10, 15 starts for those guys, not a ton of innings. They should be fresh. They should be live. Patrick Corbin from the left side, numbers 1, 2, and 3 in the rotation. Obviously extremely solid. That bullpen could be improved, but they added some individuals. Offensively, Juan Soto, Howie Kendrick, Zimmerman still. It's the same squad pretty much that won the World Series. Now, they started slow and wouldn't have even made the playoffs in a 60-game format last year, but ultimately figured things out. And if they play like they did in the second half of the season, they could be right back there once again, winning that World Series trophy. Number 6, the Minnesota Twins. The Twins last year finally made a move. Finally, a new manager in town got them going offensively. Max Kepler, Miguel Sano on the mound. They had the likes of Barrios as well as, I can't think of his name now, but he just re-signed with them. Gibby from the right side. They had Josh Donaldson to play third base, so they should continue to just mash baseballs and crush home run records like they did last year. Well, you add Donaldson's pop to that. You add a few pieces to the pitching staff, and I think your Minnesota Twins should win the AL Central, or they should certainly be the favorite in that division. And if you're a favorite to win the division, that puts you in playoff talk, and that puts you in championship talk. Obviously, Mount Everest for the Twins are the New York Yankees. They just cannot advance beyond the Yankees in the postseason, and I don't know if this year is going to be any different, but we'll have to wait and see. But those are numbers 10 through 6. Like I said, those are kind of your playoff expectations, but not championship expectations. I don't know if they're going to be disappointed in St. Louis if they don't win the World Series. Probably if they're a Cardinals fan, but if you're an outsider looking at it, I don't really think those should be the expectations there. But numbers 1 through 5, I think they are. I think these teams are World Series championship or bust. if you don't win it this year, it was a disappointing year. And that's starting out with number 5, the Tampa Bay Rays. We touched on it earlier, how people in Tampa are very happy with what they have in that clubhouse. They think they can make a run with the likes of Charlie Morton, Blake Snell, that rotation offensively. You got McKay going both ways, hitting and pitching, coming out of the bullpen, being effective for them. They like the kids, man. They think they can play. They're really excited about this summer, and they're talking World Series down in Tampa Bay. Number 4, the Atlanta Braves. We touched on it. 100-plus wins last year in the National League. Every time they get to the postseason, they can't seem to find success. Won World Series back in the 90s while winning all those division titles. And here over the past 3 years, no World Series appearances during these division titles. But they just continued to be loaded with crazy amounts of young talent. Acuna, he signed to be there a long time. Freddie Freeman's there a long time. They got all those arms in the rotation, a bunch of names that you can't even really pronounce. Fultonevich and things along those lines. Just throwing straight gas, all mid to upper 90s, all with plus breaking balls, all continuing to figure things out at the major league level. So I think the Braves are certainly the favorite in the NL East. I don't think anybody would argue with that. I know potentially a Nationals fan may get in my comments here and say something, but the Braves, World Series or bust down in Atlanta, and that's a tough squad that's going to have to be dealt with. Number 3, I have the Houston Astros. I think Houston is going to be right there again. Yes, they lost some pieces from last year's team. Verlander had surgery earlier this year. He would have missed some time, but now he won't miss any games. He'll make all of his starts. Garrett Cole is gone out of the rotation, but Zach Greinke is still there to give him a formidable 1-2 punch. The bullpen, the back end of Presley and Ozuna in the 8th and 9th inning, which has been absolutely lights out over the past 2 years. Offensively, Correa, Springer, Altuve, Alvarez, all those guys are back. So offensively, they are loaded once again, and they don't have to deal with all the BS on the road. So they should be excited at number 3. Number 2, I have the LA Dodgers. They've been the class of the National League for years now. Like we mentioned, they added Mookie Betts and David Price in the offseason. They're continuing to make a run. Clayton Kershaw, Walker Buehler in the rotation. Justin Turner should be used as a designated hitter now, so he should be in the lineup offensively for all 60 games, even if they don't want him to play third base anymore. So the Dodgers are just absolutely loaded and absolutely the favorite in the National League. And then the number 1 team, the favorite in the American League, and that's the New York Yankees. We know it. Everybody knows it. Judge, Torres, Sanchez, Stanton. They add Garrett Cole. They lose Severino to Tommy John, but they have him in the rotation typically. So if the pitching holds up in New York, the bullpen should be strong. Octavio, all those guys on the back end, they should be right there at the top of the league, at the top of the AL East. And again, in the AL, Yankees, Astros is what it's looking like, with the Rays trying to make their way in there somehow. And then on the National League, you got Dodgers, Braves, with the Nationals, Cardinals trying to make their way in ultimately to that conversation. But out of those 5, the Rays, Braves, Astros, Dodgers, Yankees, I believe you're going to get your 2020 World Series champion. But that's every team, number 1 through 30. So if you guys agree or disagree, let me know. Hit us up on social media. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as write it here in the comments on the podcasts. If you think all those are bogus, let me know. But that'll do it here. That'll wrap it up. Another episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast is in the books. It is the 200th episode. Thank you to everybody listening out there. Baseball is officially coming back. Spring Training 2.0 starts in a week. Starts on July 1st with games starting 3 weeks after that. So we are a month away. The weekend of July 24th to 26th, we will have actual baseball to talk about. But until then, we'll continue to have quality conversation about everything regarding baseball, Major League Baseball, Minor League Baseball, International Baseball. We talk about it all here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. But I appreciate everybody listening. Once again, I am Kevin Mahalik, your host of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. I love you guys as always. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the rest of your night, everyone.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.